it's the end of the day, the last session, and I'm sure you will have had to contend with lots of QR codes before now. So here is another QR code, but this is just so both our online audience and our in-person audience can ask questions in the same space. We'll do that towards the end. So, and it sounds through with our presentation as well. You can also vote on those questions. Sort of question in. So to go back, there's 3 speakers. My name's Matt Wood, and I'm a digital learning developer at DCAD. I also have Candice, who is the learning designer at DCAD, and Paul, who's the digital learning advisor. So hopefully we can all bring a slightly different perspective through our different roles and through our different lenses. We've all kind of gone in at the deep end with talking to academic staff about generative AI, specifically large language models, and we have some reflections on how those conversations go, what's been effective, what's been less effective. We've been running bespoke workshops, and that's been mostly me and Paul, and then the wider digital team at DCAD has been going in and talking to specific departments on many days, specific sessions. So it's going to be a reflection around all of that. And to start off and to try to contextualize kind of what I've been doing in my more digital technical role, although I did work as a lecturer as well, is thinking about what it's important for academic staff to know about AI. And I came back to this idea of explainable AI that's been talked about for a little while in human-computer interaction. And it's about making these systems that we interact with a bit more explicit and trying to unpick the weeds a little bit in terms of what's actually going on inside these systems. But the issue is these systems are becoming more and more complex. So we're stacking transformer models on top of transformer models, reinforcement learning with human feedback, and actually you find even the people who built these models don't know exactly how they worked. So I think that puts us in this interesting position of how we come to terms with this new kind of quite radical transformative technology. So when I first started talking to academic staff, I was like, right, let's give them a crash course in machine learning. So I started talking to them about neural nets and how you have the first layer, you have your end layer, you have your hidden layers in the middle, action potential. So action on one affects the other, comes through in back propagation. Also because I'm a psychologist by background, I was like, okay, a neuron. We can talk about neurons. Everyone knows what a neuron is. And of course, I quickly learned some academic stuff. That was so this is where the analogy of the kind of bowl of spaghetti came. So you fit some understanding of the brains. One neuron affects another neuron, a bit like a bowl of spaghetti. But anyway, I basically scrapped that. And this is kind of the core, the principle of machine learning that we're trying to get across is you put stuff in and you get stuff out. And it might sound needlessly simplistic, but actually it's quite helpful. We're talking a lot today about prompt engineering, the importance of what we're putting in. So that is a distinctive bit of the machine learning thing, is you're asking this system to do something, and then you're getting something out. And the idea is through all of those networks, neural networks, the output is matching what you're asking of the input. I'm not going to do this today, but I normally on the visualizer get a mobile phone out and do predictive text, because that is, I've found is a good way of kind of conveying basically what ChatGPT is doing. It's predicting the next likely word in a sequence of words. But when you do predictive text, it comes up with junk because it gets set in a loop, or because it's only looking at the previous word. And of course, you're doing something a little bit more complex. You're taking and all the words that have gone before, the input to the model. So that's been quite helpful. Another analogy, we talked a lot about calculators today, but I was just, because I've been doing the same kind of talk to people, so I try and mix it up a bit to keep myself interested in anything. But this, looking into consciousness studies and mind and machines and the mechanical Turk, the chess playing automata, which some of you will know from the 1700s, was in fact a hoax. A person is within this apparently autonomous machine, and of course the early calculators. And this is no big deal for us today, because it's no big deal that we have apps and phones that can play chess with us. But at the time, consciousness or rationality, rather, was the prized attribute of consciousness, and that this was very threatening, that a machine was able to be rational and more rational than a person. Of course, we have now adjusted our worldview in a relatively short amount of time, where this is no big deal. And the argument is, although it doesn't exactly match, because obviously generative AI is coming out with something different each time, but we're in that period of adjustment where, you know, it won't be a big deal in a few years' time, but we need to come to terms with what these machines mean for the way that we change our work. So maths has adapted quite nicely. There's certain things that you have to be able to do by hand. I think we would argue there are things that it's important to be able to put a sentence together without using generative AI. But at a certain point, once you've got that core level of understanding, then it may be appropriate to use these tools that are available. So I think it's interesting to think about what that trajectory is going to look like and what we can accept as a base level. And this is basically where I finished with the explanation of generative AI for a kind of academic audience, distinguishing between narrow and general AI. This is a very narrow task. It's predicting the next word in a likely sequence of words. It's not generalized AI, which may or may not actually happen. This is a very specific task that it's trained to do. And what we might talk about a little bit, this reinforcement learning with human feedback. So this is a largely unsupervised process. Some human tweaking at the end makes the output kind of intelligible and convincing. Because for a long time, large language models were not really, they were quite gimmicky, they didn't really work. And it seems to be this human tweaking that makes them kind of, oh, this is really convincing. And then the most important thing probably that I do with academics is the ChatGPT demo, although that has extended into Bing. And if you go on Edge, you can, there's a compose tab that you can open. You've got a Word document next to it. You can just populate, you can compose something and populate it straight away, which for a lot of people are like, oh. And then Google Workspace, which was touched upon briefly as well. You can sign up for the AI workspaces. Then where it's like, help me write, and you can quickly start to generate things. And I think people seeing that in action, having a go with that, encouraging people to don't be scared of these tools. You really just, the only way to know what they can do and what they're capable of is to get in there, get them to do a bit more sophisticated prompting is really helpful. Okay, let's move on to Paul. Okay, hello. So,
little bit about myself. So I've worked at Durham now for 7 years, and I've moved from digital skills trainer to lecturer to my current role as a digital learning advisor. But before that, I was a school teacher for 10 years. So I've delivered lectures, I've taught in the classroom, and I've led a lot of workshops. And the reason I'm setting this all out now is that when I say leading these workshops was a unique experience, I want you to understand I am not exaggerating for effect. It really was a unique experience for a couple of reasons. First, normally when I'm standing in the room teaching someone, I know the answers, or at the very least, I know how to work out the answers. Quite often these workshops, I didn't. And it led to something that I'd never done before. I had a disclaimer at the very beginning of these workshops showing, what I tell you today is true. It most definitely will not be true in a year's time. Probably won't be true in a few months' time. And that's just due to the fast nature of how things are changing in this year. And that led to a lot of rewrites of this workshop. So we first delivered this workshop in March. We had 2 sessions a week apart. And in between that week, they launched ChatGPT 4 and big. We've had to rewrite this workshop, I think, 5 times already in a 3-month period. So it is changing really fast. We also made a few assumptions. And you know what they say about the word assume. So what did we assume? First, I assumed that if you signed up to a workshop that had the title ChatGPT or AI in it, you might have actually played around with ChatGPT or AI. This assumption is wrong. So what we learned from that is that one of the key things, and what Matt mentioned, is get people to play. That's the thing that really opens their eyes. Give them a scaffold to build upon and try, because then you get those wonderful lightning bolts. My favourite of which was when a lecturer from classics came in. When I've just come along out of interest, but I'm okay. It doesn't do Latin. And I asked the question, have you tried it? He didn't know. Let's try it. Tried it? Like, let's do Latin. Like, yes, it does. And once you get that on board, it's like, okay, this applies to you as well. You can move on and start to think about what works in those workshops. And there are hundreds of ideas out there about how you can use large language models in your workshops. Hundreds. And practically, you can't deliver them all in 1 2-hour workshop. I'm sure you heard loads of ideas today. So with a bit of refinement, a bit of trial and improvement, we found certain hooks that really seem to engage people when we were delivering these workshops. The first idea that I'd like to share really appealed to people who lecture large groups, like 100+ students. And that's the idea that at the end of the lecture, you ask your students what went well, what could be even better, or there any concepts issue. And you just get them to put all this into an open document that they have all have access to. You can then take that content, put it into ChatGPT and ask it to analyze. And because it understands the link between those words, it can give you 3 very quick tips on what you can do in your next lecture or how you can improve your teaching. And people like that idea because it's instant feedback from a large cohort there and then. The second idea that people seem to like was the idea you take your module outline and your contents, put it in here, say, right, generate a series of formative tests that can be spaced throughout my entire module. And you can do that in seconds. And that saves you, as a lecturer, quite a lot of time and has that potential. The third hook isn't actually about using the LLMs. It's about having a debate. People want to talk about this. So what we did in our workshops is we had a few structured questions. They were very simple ones, from what are you going to tell students not to about? And that really generated some really animated debates where the room was, everyone was engaged and debating and talking about what this means for them. So if you are going back to your institutions and talk to your colleagues about this or run workshops, have those debates built in. So where next? Candice will be talking about assessment in a moment, but we've started to branch out and go into other workshops, and we've kind of subdivided them. So we are now doing workshops that focus exclusively on teaching and learning. workshops that focus exclusively on how you can use it for research. And in the future, things that we're thinking about, looking about now, is doing a lot more on prompt engineering, and also on how you can build custom chatbots for your module. So that's where our thinking is at the moment in these things. But with that, I'll pass on to Candice.
The clicker. So I've been working with Paul and with Matt, with specific departments. And so a lot of them have called us in for away days or more informal meetings of the whole department, because the university very sensibly dissolves all of the actual policy making in this area to individual departments. Some faculties might debate that and decide that they're going to have one policy, but in the meantime, each department is needing to come up with their own policy for the next academic year. And it makes sense in a lot of ways, because in different disciplines are going to be seriously affected by this technology, but in very different ways. So after they've kind of blown their minds about the technology, then I come in, oh, what about assessment? So early on in doing these workshops with departments, it became clear that there was something going on. And the first thing that popped into my head was, oh, it's like students, how they react to threshold concepts. And so I've gone with this. It's not, if you do any research in this area, it's not necessarily a robust usage of this theoretical framework, but it seems to fit really well with how academics are reacting to these. So the first thing is that threshold concepts are troublesome. And Paul and Matt do the trouble, and then I tell them all the reasons why it's troublesome. And so this is the first reaction. People get sometimes fairly emotional about these things, because they're slowly going on a process from, oh, can't turn it and detect it, to all the way to, what does learning mean in my discipline? And everything in between. So, and they lead to this state of liminality, which I think we're all in at the moment with these tools to one degree or another, where they can't just go back to, oh, let's just ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist and carry on as we were before, but they don't know where necessarily they're going to go now. So as we're developing this workshop, so again, my bit has evolved significantly over the past couple months. I was trying to think of a way to help people think through this. So I found this framework online, and when I'm presenting it to academics, I present one row at a time. I don't show them the whole table, but it does help to give a quick way into the things that people have to think about in regards to assessment. So the only thing the university is saying is, please just don't ignore this and hope it's just a fad that will go away, because that's unlikely. Next step, prohibit. And I'm sure a lot of institutions have decided to do this, at least this past academic year, because there's just nothing else to do. But obviously that's not sustainable. Invigilate, we've been saying, well, yes, in some cases, there is fundamental knowledge that students they need to know content, they need to know how to do something. Fair enough, maybe that's going to be something that is here to stay in the long term in one form or another. But the trick is to disentangle that from the things that students are actually going to be doing in a research career or in a career outside of academia, where they are going to be using these tools. So don't see that as just the solution to everything. You're going to disadvantage your students if you do that. Then the next one, in the kind of allow area, but not maybe actively encourage, in some cases, some people's assessments, they'll look at it and say, yeah, I think actually mine is okay. They might have designed something that's pretty good already. We were talking to people about a project that we were doing before this came out about authentic assessment, getting case studies. And 3 of the case studies I collected were pretty good examples of assessments that would discourage people from using these tools. The tools wouldn't be very effective in their assessments. And so there might be some, great, I've looked at it, I've reviewed it, at least in the medium term, I'm all right. Other people would be trying to design around the tools, which again, in some cases, it might be all right thing to do. You have to keep up with what the tools can and can't do if you're going to design around them. And it does like make less sense as the technology develops. I might be being a bit cynical here, thinking that in the long term, you can't design around it. But yeah, it might be a middle term solution. Then there's actively encourage. So how would people be using it in their future careers and their whatever they're doing? There's equity and privacy issues. There's the university paperwork that you have to go through to change things. Eventually, hopefully it'd be for the best. Then we get to the point, which is more at this point in the workshop, this is more of a warning to people of what they might be encountering in the future, maybe by the end of the workshop, in terms of, do you actually have to rethink what learning is in your discipline, what teaching is in your discipline, to one degree or another. Obviously, it could be in a specific bit of your discipline. It could be more wider, like when you're talking to accounting, thinking of all these tools being embedded into Excel, for example, that might be a more fundamental change, or computer science than other disciplines. But kind of preparing people for these debates that, as played out when we started talking to departments, it quickly went from a kind of a technical solution to an epistemological debate, if not an ontological debate about what do we want our students to be able to do? What does it mean to learn in this area? So go through that, and hopefully that helps give a framework that people can use, not in a 2-hour workshop perhaps, but as they're thinking through these questions. The other thing is that they are irreversible. So once they've thought about these tools and the assessments that they have, few people are saying, well, it's all right, it doesn't matter, it's fine, I'll just go back to it. There are some people every time, exams, exam calls, paper, yes, and get the sense these are the people who've been saying this ever since they stopped doing exams. But yeah, usually it's not one of us who has to say, actually, exams, blah, blah, blah. It's another one of their colleagues. No, that's not going to work anymore. For some specific things, absolutely, yes, we probably still need to do exams, but we cannot do that as a blanket solution to this. So in the irreversible space, I've tried to give people a suggested framework when they might have to think about these things. I keep forgetting. I don't know. So we're suggesting, because of Durham, policies and procedures, most people can't change their assessment for the upcoming academic year, to make a few suggestions about how they might change them. These are all suggestions. We very strongly say that this is not a solution. And this might work well for you in the short term, medium term. When the tools evolve, it might not work so well for you, might not be applicable to your discipline. But here's some things you might want to consider for next academic year, especially in terms of helping students to work through how these tools might work and how they might not work in their own discipline. Then we'll do more questions to ask. You might want to ask yourself this or that. And some tentative examples, again, not suitable to everyone. Medium term, then yeah, look at changing your assessments if you need to think critically about that. Think about demonstrating to students the learning value of doing the assessment itself, not just think of it as proof that you've already learned something. And again, more questions, more examples. And similarly, so that it's framed so that people know that they can have time and space to think about this, learn about these tools more, see what their students are doing, play with them themselves, and have that opportunity where everyone is in a better position to know how these tools can be used. So then, as Paul said, probably the most important thing about these workshops is the discursive bit. And I don't think it could do without this framing, because I went to one today that hadn't had any framing, that was just 4 policy documents that had already been written that then were discussed in the department. And it was all the same kinds of debates and discussions that people were having, but it did seem a lot more emotional and troublesome than when we've gone through this process of trying to frame and lead people through these different questions and challenges and options beforehand. That could be my personal thing, because that's what I do, and I didn't do that today. But on the plus side, once they've had a kind of a framing and they've been able to play with the tools if they haven't already, then those discussions among people all in the same discipline have been incredibly valuable for moving them forward to something that's going to be beneficial to them and their students in the future. So then just looking to the future, but hopefully eventually this will be integrative. And I think this goes back to the implications for learning and teaching as well as assessment. Inevitably the question is, well, what is the assessment for? Why are we assessing these students in this way? What is the benefit of this? And then it goes back to those learning and teaching questions. What do we actually want the students to know and do by the end of this? So if the discursive bit goes well, then those questions start to emerge as well. And people are going away thinking about it a lot more deeply than they were when they came in. Of course, then in the future, we would hope that they get to this point where in the threshold concept characteristics, where it's reconstitutive in terms of their practice and their discipline, they're thinking about it in a new way. That's more helpful to both them and their students, and it probably will be transformative. And from our point of view, advocating for authentic assessment and active learning and all these things that we do for a long time that might have fallen on deaf ears, perhaps this will be the impetus for that transformation to actually take place. So if you're interested, we put together a Padlet where we've started to add different kinds of resources about these tools in higher education. As you'll know, there's not a lot of research in that area. And when that research does publish, it'll probably be 2 years old. But when it does pop up, we will put it on there, as well as just things that we might find useful in this space. Thank you very much for your attention in this warm room on a Friday.